I'm sure you've found yourself in this position many times, where your knight gets pinned by the bishop. Well, today we're going to learn how to punish this mistake, or rather, this move or this pin, in the style of Bobby Fischer. We've studied how Bobby Fischer did it, so we can be sure this will be a good way to counter this pin. Notice that most of us, when we see a pin like this, either put a bishop in between and play passively to avoid more problems, or maybe try to chase the bishop away. We have several ideas, but what we're going to do is handle it the way Bobby Fischer did. And what better way than to look at an example from Fischer himself, using this technique to punish the bishop pin on g4. Let's take a look. e4, e5 with the black pieces played by Iwa Geller. So we're talking about two of the greats from that era. Knight to f3, knight to c6, bishop to b5, setting up the Ruy Lopez or Spanish opening, a6, bishop to a4, d6, and Fischer castle short. Notice that we're in a completely typical position of the Ruy Lopez opening, and here Geller already played the pin that's the subject of this video. Notice now, what is Geller threatening? Well, with this pin, he's not actually threatening anything at all, it's just that we can't move the knight. However, if it were Geller's turn again, what he could do is bring his knight over here, not right now because it's pinned, but after two moves, like these two, then he would be threatening to bring the knight here and break apart Fischer's kingside pawn structure. So here, Bobby Fischer makes his first decision to drive this bishop away. Obviously, this move would be bad because you'd be giving up the bishop pair and improving your opponent's queen, so it's not even considered. Here, Geller, of course, keeps up the pressure on the pen, otherwise, bringing the bishop here would have been pointless. Once this bishop has retreated here, Fischer plays c3. Why? Well, obviously, to prevent this knight jump. As we mentioned before, right now the knight jump isn't a threat because it's pinned, but after a move like b5, once the bishop moves away, this jump would become a threat. So this move, c3, controls that square, and as a result, makes the pin defenseless and prevents any increase on it. So instead of jumping with the knight, what Geller did was bring the queen to f6. Notice now that Geller is putting incredible pressure on the knight. As I said, this bishop can't come back here to defend, and this knight can't jump here to defend either. So now, after the exchanges, what did we say happens after the exchanges? Notice that now the king side would be completely open, giving Geller a pretty significant advantage. However, Fischer realized here that Geller is falling behind in development. He hasn't developed this knight or this bishop yet. So his king is still a long way from castling, or else he'd have to castle queenside, which doesn't seem very likely because after this exchange, the queenside would be opened up. So Geller is way behind in development, and here there's this move that goes completely against expectations. Why? Because it's true that we're attacking this bishop and it has to move, but we're also opening up our entire kingside. So it goes against the rules of castling, which say you should protect your king, but here we're going to open it up. Why? Because we're going to punish all his pieces here and gain the advantage in development. Notice that now this bishop is attacking the e4 pawn. By retreating, it's attacking the e4 pawn. But if you know Bobby Fischer, he always said that the secret to a good defense is a strong attack. So here, what would we play? Rook to e1, we could play d3, notice to maintain the structure, or even play bishop to c2, maybe placing this bishop better to protect the d4 pawn. But Bobby Fischer, of course, didn't play any of that. Instead, he went straight for the attack with d4. What is d4 Threm? Well, the threat is obvious. To take control of the center, pin this knight even more, which would be really annoying. Here, they'd have to make a maneuver like this and then move this knight to a really bad square. Notice these pieces here that still haven't developed. So with d4, Fischer is putting a lot of pressure. It's true that now this bishop is going to capture the e4 pawn and increase the pressure on this knight. Notice it's only defended by the queen. But Fischer brought out his other knight, knight to b2. Besides defending this knight on f3, it's attacking this bishop, which now has to retreat. As you can see, Fischer's now down a pawn he sacrificed, but notice how his pieces are much more active and make a lot more sense. All these pieces are stuck here, and he only has this knight, which Fischer now traded to double these pawns. And notice that the only pieces Geller has are stuck here. How did Bobby Fischer continue here? Fischer continued by capturing this pawn, but check out a move that would have been absolutely spectacular as well. Here, he could have played queen to a 4, and notice how now he's putting massive pressure on this pawn. He would have to come over to defend with the king here, and this king would be left without castling and stuck in the center of the board with no pieces to protect him. Notice that a move like d5 wouldn't work either, because after the exchanges, the queen would have to move away, and this pawn would now be completely exposed since this pawn would no longer be defending it. So he would have to bring the king here. In other words, this move would be very powerful. No less powerful is the pawn exchange that Bobby Fischer played. D takes e5. Notice that now, after the exchanges, this pawn can be captured by the knight, even though it's not defended, because black couldn't take it due to rook to e1, losing the queen, with a brutal pin on this enemy queen. Notice that lines are opening up against the king, and the attack is starting to get dangerous, since Geller doesn't have any pieces developed. Here, bishop to d6 by Geller. Notice that Elon is hanging on. Bishop to d6 by Geller, forcing this knight to move. He doesn't want to waste time, so he trades knight for bishop. Here, Bobby Fischer, and the recapture is made by the queen. And here, what he does is rook to e1 as well to give this check to the king, who has to move to protect himself a bit since bringing out this knight would be a little dangerous because of the pins. He comes over here, and notice that Fischer keeps attacking with the knight on c4. He sets his sights on this bishop. Notice that Geller goes on the attack here. A powerful move like h5. What do you think Bobby Fischer did here? Did he defend? Did he try to defend over here? Obviously not. He couldn't have cared less about that over there and captured this knight, which was recaptured by this pawn, and now he kept increasing the pressure on this pawn with this little bishop here. Bishop f4, attacking this pawn with both the queen and the bishop, and so it would be almost checkmate. Notice that the rook controls this square, so it's very dangerous. He had to push this pawn forward. Now then, it seems like this attack is already over, and he has to try to defend against this attack coming from Geller. Do you think he made a defensive move like this? No. The best, defense is a good offense, as Bobby Fischer used to say, and he brought his queen out here. What's the idea behind queen of b3? Well, let's take a look at it together. Notice now, if it were Fischer's turn again, he'd bring his queen over here, check, and it would be almost checkmate since the king can't escape. They'd have to give up this knight here. So be careful because this move is a really powerful threat. Here, black doesn't have much that can do to stop this. They tried to launch their own attack. Notice that they take this pawn, and Fischer, instead of playing queen to b4, which would have been an excellent move, found an even better one, queen to b7, attacking this rook. Why is it even better? Well, notice that now this rook has to move. It can't come here because that would be a total disaster. After the exchanges, the other rook would come in, check, they'd have to move, and the same mate as before would follow. So it more or less goes over here, and now, check this out, the brutal move. What is it? It's the same as before, queen to b4. And you might be wondering, why is it even more brutal than before? Because now, after the exchanges, when the bishop has given up, we'll take here, Fischer took this knight, and now it's check, and when they move away, we'll also take the rook. So, you see, the difference here is absolutely huge. Even if they try to come here to give a check, you can just block with the bishop, and the material difference is just massive. Obviously, this king went over here, right? Before the check. As you can see, Fischer punished him in a truly amazing way. Let's look at this example against Jimenez. Knight to f3, knight to c6. Or Ruy Lopez as well. Here, after pushing him away, he captured the knight, they exchanged knights, Fischer castled, and Jimenez played f6. Notice that when he plays f6, it's because he wants the castle long, otherwise this structure would be pretty bad for the king. d4 from Fischer. And here, of course, comes the pin from the black pieces. Now, notice that they're not threatening anything compared to before, right? Compared to before, They don't have this knight here to jump in. They don't have the queen that could come to f6. So what are they threatening now? Well, notice that what they're threatening is this pawn right here. Now, you couldn't, how should I put it? You couldn't play a move like this one here, for example, just to say something, because after the exchanges, the d4 pawn would fall. So what Bobby Fischer did was play c3, actually defending, sorry, this pawn here after the exchanges. Notice, now black played queen to d7. Look, I suppose queen to d7 had two ideas. First, to castle long. Just look at what a great position black would have after castling long. Where are you going, you little rascal? Or maybe when they play h3, try to capture here with 2, although that would be crazy. Obviously, Fischer plays h3, which is what he has to do to ask what this bishop wants to do. Does it want to capture here, sacrifice itself, and come over here? Or, the most logical, bishop to h5, keeping the pin, which is what Jimenez did in this game. So look here, according to Bobby Fischer, the best move isn't to play g4, but rather there's a very common tactical theme here, which is to sacrifice the knight and the queen at the same time. And let's analyze the following. We're threatening the queen, although they're also threatening ours. They're threatening to capture the knight because we're giving it away, but we're threatening to capture the bishop with check. So let's first see what happens if they capture the knight. We would capture the bishop with check, and on the next move, we would capture this pawn here. In other words, we'd be completely winning. It would be silly to capture this knight here. How does this stand? I don't remember anymore. This is like this, and this is like this. It would be silly to capture the knight on d5. Therefore, the other move would be queen takes bishop, which is what actually happened in the game. A queen exchange. Notice that now, after king takes knight and rook takes bishop, Bobby Fischer is left with a very comfortable endgame to play. A castled king, a rook aiming at the king with x-ray pressure, a much better center, and an overall much more comfortable setup for the white pieces than for the black pieces. If you want to look up this game, it's Fischer versus Jimenez, and Fischer gives a masterclass on how to finish this endgame. Check out this example, which is really interesting. Why? Because we're doing it with the black pieces. The most important thing about this pin isn't that it's played in the Spanish opening, but that it can be played in the Italian opening, the Scotch opening, in the Sicilian, in all openings. What's important is the bishop pin, which is what we're looking at right now. Take a look at this game with a Sicilian Najdorf. If anyone doesn't know how the Sicilian Najdorf is played, here it is. e4, c5, knight f3, d6, d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, knight f6, knight c3. And notice that the Najdorf defense in the Sicilian is to play a6 here. This would be the open variation of the Sicilian. We'll explain this more thoroughly in another video. Notice that here, with white, they already played this semi-pin because it's not a full pin yet. Although Fischer says, oh, you want to pin me? Go ahead, pin me. Look, he pins himself. f4 continued the pressure to come here with the pawn and pin this knight. But what happened to Fischer? Well, notice that he took advantage of the fact that this bishop can't retreat now to play queen to b6. Take a look at this. It's true that now you can trade this bishop for this knight and damage black's pawn structure. But now we're putting pressure on this pawn here, which usually isn't defended. For example, here white played queen to d2, Fischer captured this pawn here, and after, the rook moved to b1, the queen had to retreat to a square like a6. Notice that taking this pawn, if we're white, doesn't really worry us too much. Why? Because now the black queen, which we know is the strongest piece in chess, the queen, ends up a bit out of position, right? And it's just for a pawn, so we don't have anything to be afraid of. Notice that the game continued like this. He traded this knight here for the bishop, messed up the opponent's pawn structure a bit, but it's no big deal. Bishop to e2, bishop to g7, white castles, and check out Bobby Fischer's star move here. Notice that here it doesn't really matter to us, because we wouldn't even have to castle if we didn't want to. We could bring the rook straight over to attack the opponent's castling, so it's actually interesting to capture with this pawn. But here, Bobby Fischer played f5, a really interesting move. It looks like we're exposing the king. But here, what was Bobby Fischer thinking? He doesn't care about exposing his king. He doesn't mind being left unprotected. He doesn't try to defend. He tries to attack. Yeah, I've got weaknesses? Well, that's exactly where I'm going to attack. Notice that after the capture, instead of worrying about exposing the king, both opponents are just focused on their attack. And look, Bobby Fischer placed his queen right on c5, and they're winning this knight that's attacked by two pieces. There's no way to defend it, not at all. This pawn here could also keep advancing, and the pressure's incredible, especially with this knight, so there's just no way. He's lost a knight.